What if I told you that the tartan you associate with Scotland actually comes from a people who never called themselves Scottish? That the kilts worn today would be completely foreign to Scotland's earliest inhabitants, and that your Scottish DNA might contain genetic markers from a mysterious people whose very name strikes fear into the hearts of Roman legions? Today, we're diving deep into one of Europe's most fascinating genetic mysteries. We'll uncover why Scottish DNA is unlike anywhere else on Earth, reveal the shocking truth about what happened 4,400 years ago that changed everything, and I'll show you exactly which ancient peoples are flowing through your veins right now. But first, let me ask you something that might surprise you. Picture this. It's 20,000 years ago, and where Edinburgh stands today, there's nothing but a mile-thick sheet of ice. The entire landscape that would become Scotland is a frozen wasteland, completely uninhabitable. So here's our first mystery. If Scotland was buried under ice, where did the Scottish people actually come from? The answer takes us on a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about Scottish ancestry. Because the story begins not in Scotland at all, but in the caves and coastal settlements of Ice Age Europe, with people whose genetic legacy still runs through Scottish veins today. As the last glaciers retreated around 12,000 years ago, small bands of hardy hunter-gatherers began following the melting ice northward. These weren't casual wanderers. They were survivors, carrying within their cells some of Europe's most ancient genetic lineages. The women carried mitochondrial DNA haplogroup U5, a marker so old it predates agriculture itself. The men bore Y chromosome haplogroup I2, linked to the robust, often blue-eyed populations that had weathered the Ice Age in southern refuges. But here's where it gets interesting, and here's a question I want you to keep in mind as we continue. Why do some Scottish communities, particularly in the Highlands and Islands, still carry these ancient Ice Age markers at much higher frequencies than anywhere else in Britain? These Mesolithic pioneers weren't the primitive cave dwellers popular culture often portrays. Archaeological evidence from sites like Star Carr in Yorkshire and Howick in Northumberland, just south of what would become Scotland, reveals sophisticated societies. They crafted intricate microliths, built seasonal shelters, and developed complex hunting strategies that allowed them to thrive in post-glacial Britain. In Scotland, traces of these first inhabitants have been found from South Lanarkshire to the Isle of Skye. At sites like Sand in Applecross, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of permanent settlements, shell middens, and tool-making workshops. These weren't nomads. They were establishing the first Scottish communities, complete with trade networks stretching across the North Sea. But their world was about to change forever. Around 6,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened that would reshape not just Scotland but all of Europe. And this brings us to our next mystery. Around 4000 BC, boats began appearing on Scotland's horizon, carrying people unlike any the land had seen before. These Neolithic farmers brought with them domesticated cattle, sheep, and grain. But more importantly, they brought revolutionary new ways of thinking about the world. Genetically, these newcomers were dramatically different from the hunter-gatherers. The women carried mitochondrial lineages J, K, T, and H, markers that had originated in the Fertile Crescent and spread across Europe with agriculture. The men bore Y chromosome haplogroups G2A, E1B1B, and J, linking them to farming communities from Anatolia to the Atlantic. But here's what makes Scotland unique in this story. Unlike in southern Britain, where genetic evidence suggests farmers largely replaced the existing hunter-gatherer populations, in Scotland we see something remarkable: sustained mixing and cultural exchange. The evidence is written in stone. At Skara Brae in Orkney, built around 3200 BC, we find one of Europe's best-preserved Neolithic villages. But the construction techniques, the choice of materials, even the layout of the homes, suggest a fusion of farming knowledge with intimate understanding of local conditions that could only come from generations of hunter-gatherer experience. This cultural blending created something new, a distinctly Scottish Neolithic culture that would lay the foundation for everything that followed. But the most dramatic change was yet to come. Now we come to perhaps the most shocking chapter in Scottish genetic history. Around 2400 BC, something happened that was so dramatic, so complete, that it fundamentally altered the genetic landscape of Scotland forever. The Bell Beaker people arrived from continental Europe, and within just a few generations, up to 90% of the existing male lineages in Britain simply vanished from the genetic record. This wasn't gradual change. This was transformation on a scale that's almost incomprehensible. But who were these Bell Beaker people, and how did they achieve such complete genetic dominance? The answer lies in the steppes of Central Asia, thousands of miles from Scotland's shores. These newcomers carried massive amounts of what geneticists call steppe ancestry, DNA from the Yamnaya culture of the Pontic-Caspian steppes. With them came revolutionary technologies, bronze metallurgy, wheeled transport, horse domestication, and most significantly, Y-chromosome haplogroup R1b M269, particularly the L21 subclade that would come to dominate Scottish male lineages. The speed and completeness of this genetic replacement suggests this wasn't just migration, it was a complete social revolution. The newcomers didn't just settle alongside existing populations. They fundamentally restructured society itself. And here's a question that will become crucial as we continue. If this change was so dramatic, why do we still find those ancient hunter-gatherer and Neolithic lineages in Scottish DNA today? The answer reveals something profound about Scottish survival and resistance. By 800 BC, the genetic foundation of modern Scotland was largely in place, but the cultural story was just beginning. The land was now home to several distinct Celtic-speaking peoples, each with their own territories, customs, and mysteries. In the northeast lived the Picts, perhaps the most enigmatic people in Scottish history. For centuries, historians debated whether the Picts were an isolated pre-Celtic population or part of the broader Celtic world. The answer, revealed through cutting-edge genetic analysis in 2023, was surprising. The Picts shared close genetic affinities with the ancestors of modern Western Scots, Irish, and Welsh populations. They weren't outsiders. They were part of the same Atlantic Celtic family that had emerged from the Bronze Age population. But the Picts left us with tantalizing mysteries. Their symbol stones, scattered across northeast Scotland, display a sophisticated iconographic system that we still can't fully decode. Their language, known primarily through place names and inscriptions, appears to have been Celtic, but with possible pre-Indo-European substrate elements. In the west, the Gaels were establishing their presence. Migrating from Ireland in the early medieval period, they founded the kingdom of Dalriata, centered on what is now Argyll. But here's what's fascinating from a genetic perspective. Despite their cultural distinctiveness, the Gaels blended seamlessly with local populations. Their genes, their language, and their customs merged with existing Scottish communities to create the Gaelic Scotland we recognize today. The south was dominated by Britons, Celtic-speaking peoples related to those found throughout much of Britain. But unlike their neighbors, the Scottish Britons would face a unique challenge that would shape their genetic legacy. The Romans called them Caledonii, the people of the forests. When Roman legions marched north of Hadrian's Wall, they encountered fierce resistance from confederations of Scottish tribes who refused to submit to imperial rule. The Battle of Mons Graupius in 83 AD, described by the Roman historian Tacitus, saw Scottish forces under the leadership of Calgacus face the might of the Roman Empire. Though the Romans claimed victory, their retreat south and the construction of the Antonine Wall suggest the conquest was far from complete. From a genetic perspective, the Roman impact on Scotland was minimal. While southern England shows clear evidence of Mediterranean genetic markers introduced during the Roman period, Scotland's genetic profile remained remarkably consistent. This wasn't just geographic isolation, it was active resistance that preserved Scottish genetic distinctiveness. But the Romans left Scotland with something invaluable: the first written descriptions of Scottish peoples, their customs, and their fierce independence. Tacitus quotes Calgacus delivering one of history's most powerful speeches against imperialism. They make a wasteland and call it peace. This resistance to foreign domination would become a defining characteristic of Scottish culture, but it was about to face its greatest test. Around 800 AD, dragon-prowed longships began appearing in Scottish waters. The Viking raids had begun, and Scotland's northern and western coasts would never be the same. But here's where the popular narrative gets it wrong. The Norse impact on Scotland wasn't just about raids and pillaging, it was about settlement, intermarriage, and the creation of entirely new hybrid cultures. In Orkney and Shetland, Norse settlement was so complete that these islands became more Scandinavian than Scottish. Genetic analysis reveals that Norse ancestry makes up 25 to 40% of the modern gene pool in these northern isles. The Norse brought new genetic lineages, particularly Y chromosome haplogroups R1a, Z2H4, and I1, that remain prominent today. But the most fascinating development was the emergence of the Norse Gaels, a hybrid culture that combined Scandinavian seafaring traditions with Celtic social structures. These people ruled the Kingdom of the Isles, dominated trade routes from Ireland to Iceland, and produced the feared Galaglass warriors who served as mercenaries throughout the medieval world. The genetic evidence tells us this wasn't just male-dominated conquest. Norse women settled in Scotland too, bringing Scandinavian mitochondrial lineages that mixed with existing Scottish populations. In the Hebrides, where Norse settlement was significant but not overwhelming, Norse ancestry accounts for 7 to 10% of the modern gene pool. And this brings us to a crucial question. How did these waves of settlement create the clan system that would become synonymous with Scottish identity? By the 13th century, Scotland had developed its distinctive clan system, extended kinship groups that combined genetic relationship with political alliance. But modern genetic analysis reveals that clan membership was more complex than simple blood relationship. Take Clan Donald, Scotland's largest clan. Genetic studies show that many Donald lineages carry Norse Gaelic R1a ancestry, linking them to the Lords of the Isles and their Scandinavian heritage. But the clan also incorporated families with purely Gaelic backgrounds, Anglo-Saxon origins, and even Norman connections. The Bruce family, made famous by Robert the Bruce, appears to carry the rare Y chromosome subclade FTB55831, a lineage that may trace back to Norman origins, but became thoroughly Scottish through generations of Scottish soil and Scottish struggle. This genetic diversity within clans reflects a crucial truth about Scottish identity. It was never purely about blood, but about belonging, loyalty, and shared experience. The clan system preserved family identities while creating space for adoption, intermarriage, and cultural assimilation. But the clan system would face its greatest challenge in the centuries that followed. From the 18th century onward, Scotland experienced one of history's great population dispersals. The Highland clearances, economic hardship, and the search for opportunity drove millions of Scots to seek new homes across the globe. This diaspora carried Scottish DNA to every continent. Today, over 30 million people worldwide claim Scottish ancestry, far more than Scotland's current population of 5.5 million. In countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, Scottish genetic markers tell the story of communities that maintain their identity across oceans and generations. But here's what's remarkable. Despite centuries of emigration and immigration, Scotland's genetic structure has remained remarkably stable. The Highland and Island communities that were most affected by the clearances have preserved genetic lineages that trace back thousands of years. Today's cutting-edge genetic analysis, based on studies of over 2,500 individuals, reveals that Scotland divides into 6 main genetic clusters that mirror ancient kingdoms. The northeast cluster reflects Pictish heritage, with high frequencies of Neolithic farmer ancestry mixed with Bell Beaker lineages. This is where you'll find the strongest concentrations of ancient Scottish genetic markers. The southwest cluster shows strong Gaelic influence, with Irish connections visible in both paternal and maternal lineages. The legacy of Dal Riata lives on in modern DNA. The borders cluster displays the most Anglo-Saxon influence, with Germanic Y chromosome markers like R1BU106 and I1 reflecting centuries of contact with Northumbrian and English populations. The Hebrides cluster is perhaps the most complex, combining ancient Scottish lineages with significant Norse ancestry and continued Irish connections. Orkney remains distinctly Norse-influenced, with Scandinavian ancestry levels unmatched anywhere else in Scotland. Shetland shows the highest Norse ancestry of all, reflecting its historical position as a Scandinavian outpost in the North Atlantic. So what does this mean for your own Scottish ancestry? Your DNA is a library containing thousands of years of Scottish history. If you carry Y chromosome R1b L21, you're connected to the Bell Beaker revolution that transformed Bronze Age Scotland. This marker links you to the Celtic warrior aristocracies that resisted Roman conquest and built the foundations of Scottish civilization. Mitochondrial haplogroup H connects you to the Neolithic farmers who built Skara Brae and established Scotland's first permanent settlements. U5 lineages reach back to the Ice Age hunters, who were among the first humans to walk on Scottish soil. Norse markers like R1AZ284 or I1 connect you to the Vikings who ruled the northern seas and created the hybrid Norse-Gaelic culture of the Western Isles. But here's what makes Scottish DNA truly unique. It's not just about individual lineages, but about how these lineages combined, survived, and evolved together. Scottish DNA is a testament to resilience, adaptation, and the ability to forge unity from diversity. We began with a question about who the first Scots really were, and we've discovered that there's no simple answer. The first Scots were Ice Age hunters and Neolithic farmers. They were Bronze Age warriors and Iron Age Celts. They were Picts and Gaels and Norse Gaels. They were survivors who adapted, resisted, and endured. Today, Scottish DNA continues to evolve. Immigration from around the world is adding new chapters to Scotland's genetic story, while modern transportation and communication are connecting Scottish communities globally in ways that would have amazed our ancestors. But the ancient lineages persist. In Highland glens and island communities, in the scattered Scottish diaspora around the world, the genetic legacy of Scotland's earliest peoples continues to flow through human bloodstreams, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom of survival, the memory of resistance, and the promise of continuity. Your Scottish DNA isn't just a list of percentages on a test result, it's a connection to one of humanity's great survival stories, written in the most permanent ink of all, the code of life itself. The story of Scottish DNA is still being written, in laboratories and living rooms, in family reunions and research papers. And every time someone discovers their Scottish heritage, they're not just learning about the past. They're becoming part of this continuing story of survival, adaptation, and identity that stretches back to the very edges of the Ice Age and forward into an unknowable future.